Hello, everybody. Give just a minute for people to continue joining. So grateful for you all joining us while there is some sports going on. You know that it's a big conflict, so I'm happy that you're all here. All right, we seem to be slowing down a little bit here. So I'm going to hop right in because we have a lot to talk about today, and I am so excited for today's topic. So, first and foremost, hello, everybody. Welcome in. If you're new here, or welcome back if you haven't been before. This is Focus Friday. I'm Tiffany MacLennan, your host, and I'm so excited that you are watching us instead of hockey. I'll be completely blunt. That is a hard thing to come up against. I know my partner is texting me every like 30 seconds, being like, this is what happened. So if any of you are getting those texts too, I'm sorry that you can't be fully invested in the sports. As always, this session and this kind of series of sessions is really designed as a way to, make some new friends, learn some cool things, hang out on a Friday afternoon, have a good cup of coffee, spend some time together, and really just kind of have some broader based conversations about, the Canadian higher education sector and what's going on, and have some time to reflect together on things that are happening across the sector overall. And today's theme, I think, fits really well into that, which kind of sits at the intersection, if you will, of governance and sustainability and quality and finance. As we all know, across the country, institutions all around are facing stronger and stronger financial pressures. But at the same time, we are continued to produce exceptional quality education, doing more with less, as the people say. Um, that is my phone ringing. Um, One of the questions that I think has been asked a lot this year, maybe over the past 2 years, but particularly in this year, do we really understand what the true costs of our academic programming are? When we talk about things like, oh, well, program closure is the mechanism of financial sustainability within our institutions and how we sustain funding, I haven't been particularly convinced that that is true. So I'm happy that we can have a broader conversation about it today. Um, so, like I said, we're going to chat about that a little bit today, but particularly what happens when there's some better data, particularly program level financial data, and how it becomes a part of a broader conversation overall. So, I have a fantastic group of people with me here today, who are going to be joining in with a variety of perspectives on this topic. Joanne McKee, the Chief Financial Officer at Toronto Metropolitan University. Donna Kotsopoulos, the Dean and Professor in the Faculty of Education at Western University. Jovan Groen, the Director of Academic Quality and Enhancement at Western, and Brandon Dickson, a PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo, who, folks, is going on the job market soon. So I believe that you could pay some big attention if you want to scoop some young up and coming talent. Um, but together, this group has been talking a lot about kind of what better design and approaches and thinking and talking about program costing and institutional sustainability really look like. So I'm really looking forward into digging into what this means, not only for their own institutions, but for institutions across Canada. And just importantly, at the end, hearing about how this fits into your context. So I think we'll hop right in with questions. And as I mentioned, for people who are just coming in and kind of miss my very top spiel, we talk all the time about quality, enrollment, student demand as kind of some of the core drivers for decision making in our institutions. Um, but institutions at the same time are having more and more barriers financially and within their decision making. So today we're asking, what does it really mean to understand the true financial picture of an academic program? So, Donna, I think I'm going to start with you. And my big question to start us off is what shifts have institutions started? Let me rephrase my question. What shifts, if institutions started taking program level financial sustainability seriously, would happen? What would be the lever for change? exactly is your group proposing?
So thank you very much, Tiffany, for having us here today. One of our team members was not able to join. That's Tina Gobel from Guelph. We've been working on these issues for more than a decade with a number of SSHRC-funded projects. And over the last couple of years, we've been really focusing on financial viability and sustainability, given the discussions in the sector. So one of the things that has guided our work is a theoretical framework that describes higher education, we think, really well, and that's punctuated equilibrium. So when you think about higher education, for the most part, we tend to go along and do the same sort of things and keep moving along, attending to our mission, attending to our goal in terms of advancing excellence in research and teaching. But really, what inspires change? It's usually punctuated by some major geopolitical, financial circumstance that forces us to stop and make changes. And so that you see that, particularly over the last couple of years, we've had really significant concerns across the country, really internationally, in terms of financing higher education. We've had some interesting stories over the last couple of weeks out of BC and Newfoundland in terms of financial sustainability. These are what we call those radical moments where we then have to engage in something hugely transformative to address the crisis at hand. And so if people who are on the call had a chance to come last week and attend the session by Queen's, what we see is that institutions will have to often pause and make some significant changes, either by, as you mentioned, Tiffany, stopping programs, pausing programs, or as Queen's did, undertaking a major transformative event to try to streamline academic programming with the goal of academic efficiencies. We talk about academic and administrative efficiencies, but the reality is there's no amount of administrative costs that are going to deal with some of the deficits we're seeing in the sector, especially since 80% of the budget is often on the academic side. So my team has really been thinking carefully about what are the levers to help us function in these periods of equilibrium without having to get to this point of having some major disruption and forcing us into things like program closures or major programmatic reviews to address shortfalls. And again, it's largely been geopolitical. In the international student crisis has created havoc across the system, but there are other issues too, including underfunding. But shout out to Ontario for the recent announcement. I will say that. We're grateful to see that. So one of the things that we've been looking at are levers and potential levers, and where we've been talking a lot about is the role of quality assurance, especially when we're thinking about academic efficiencies. So I'm going to give you a context for all of us to consider. There are 2 points that we're particularly paying attention to. We're paying attention to the new program proposals, and we're paying very close attention to cyclical reviews. We've also, and you'll hear Brandon talk a little bit about it, we've done a national study on what this looks like across the country and what are the opportunities for the provinces and institutions. So the scenario that we have, that we want the people joining us today to consider, is a program has been in existence for 20 plus years. At the cyclical review, it's been found to be good quality. There are 5 full-time faculty, and there are less than 5 students enrolled in the major. The program offers service teaching, and so that offsets some of the potential costs. But what are the options for this program? What are the viable options for this program? Predominantly, what we often see is the program gets put through as good quality, and we continue on despite the fact that we really have no sense of whether this is a sustainable or viable program. And so what we've been talking about is quality assurance, looking as a mechanism, as a lever for assessing financial viability and sustainability, with the basic premise that we can't separate cost from quality. Traditionally, it has been separated. And what we're suggesting is that there's an opportunity for us to reflect in a much more meaningful way if we connect this concept of cost to quality assurance. I'm just going to pause there to say there's only one jurisdiction in Canada that does this, only one. And so you often find when we've been studying those programs slated for closure that the reality of the viability of the program has been well documented, but no mechanisms to actually make change. And so that's the kind of work that we've been doing. The point, I'll end on this point, quality assurance being a lever for assessing financial viability and sustainability, provided that you've got the tools to do that. And that's some of the work that my team has done. We've developed those tools as open access tools. One of the things that I want to close on before you go on to your next session, just to be really clear, we're not talking about making a profit. We're not necessarily talking about breaking even. We recognize that there are some programs that will be mission critical to an institution, to a faculty, to a program that may have to operate it as a deficit. But as an institution, as a program, as a faculty, it's really critical to know when those instances are occurring and to be able to make informed decisions on where those subventions may take place.
Fantastic, Donna. Thank you so much. Brandon, I'm going to hop over to you now. What kind of research and evidence are you really basing this on? And Donna mentioned, you folks did some look across the country. So I think the secondary question I would have is how widespread actually is this challenge across the country?
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany, and thanks, Donna, for setting us up. And I should thank Tiffany for the call out around me going on the job market. Always appreciate it. So I'll highlight that again for everybody. But the research that we've been doing really has taken kind of two major prongs so far. One that's published, if you search any of our names on Google Scholar, you'll find the first article, and one that's currently going through the publication process, and one that's kind of ongoing that's supporting a lot of that work. The first one really is looking at quality assurance agencies and the policies that they have specifically around new program approvals across Canada. And the goal of this really was to understand how do the external QA agencies and their policies and procedures vary, and is or is not financial viability and sustainability considered as part of QA processes. And what we saw, as Donna mentioned, was that Alberta is the only one that actually has a requirement for this to be built into the proposal. So when it goes to the province, it specifically asks that it needs to consider things like, is this relevant to the province? How is this going to impact the financials of the institution? And how is this going to impact the ability of it to be funded going forward? The second prong of our research that's currently going through publication right now is a series of town halls where we kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper on what we got from the policy side of things. So we sat down with people from the QA agencies from across the country, from every province, as well as from a number of universities. We had 19 individuals who were representing every province from across the country, and then got people from 17 universities across Canada who were serving in Jovan's role as directors of quality assurance or similar, depending on what the institution was, and kind of wanted to get a sense from them as how do QA processes related to programmatic viability and sustainability actually fit within their QA processes, or do they? And what we kind of saw was that there's really large scale challenges. Oftentimes when people are talking about financial viability and sustainability and considering the academic costing of programs, proxies are typically what's being used. And some of you might be saying, well, we have a tool. And some of you might have even clicked on the link that Tiffany dropped in the chat there that takes you to our open access tools that we published and said, we do something like this already. And the reality is you're the anomaly. If your institution is doing that, that's great, but that's not what we saw across the country. In total, only about half of the institutions that we looked at are doing any kind of formal budget approval as part of their quality assurance process when they're proposing a new program. And the vast majority of them don't check back. What we also saw was that about a third of the institutions have some kind of a budget proposal process as part of the QA process at the beginning, but a lot of the other half of those institutions that actually have it do it at the very end. And so what we heard from some of these institutions was they would have this kind of parallel process going on where it would be going up the quality assurance stream on the one side. They would find that the program was of good quality, and then it would be going up the budget side of the house on the other side. And they would realize, actually, we don't have the funding to do that. So at this point, you've wasted, in terms of course release, in terms of hours you put into it, 50 to $100,000, if not more, investing in this program. And then you say, okay, maybe we're not going to cut this completely, but we're going to shelve it. We can't offer this program right now. And so what we saw was that there's been large scale challenges. And so this has led us to the ongoing research that we're doing now, where we've picked a selection of 17 universities from across the country, and we're comparing all elements of things like their budget strategies, operational efficiency, and building in some of those elements to, QA operations, what the purpose of QA is, and trying to get a deeper dive on those institutions. So with that, those are some of the challenges we're facing, and other people are going to comment on them in a little bit more detail in their responses later.
I think that shifts very well actually into my next question for Joanne. A lot of this work that we're talking about is kind of the university level, and a part of that is that you have a Senate, a board, a nice little bicameral governance structure. So, Joanne, I think my question to you would be, what makes doing things like costing academic programming particularly challenging in a bicameral governance structure? And where do the conversations really kind of break down?
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. Yeah. So thank you for the question, Tiffany. So a bicameral governance structure establishes the oversight responsibilities, as many of us know, between the board and the Senate. So it naturally impacts the financial oversight responsibilities. So, for example, broadly speaking, the board oversees the business affairs. So, central finance units, like myself, we manage university-wide financial matters and this reporting to the board. In Ontario, in particular, the provincial governments require boards to approve new programs, given the commitment of the financial resources. So, this is typically the one time when boards and central offices, like myself, have to see academic program costing. However, given that the Senate oversees program approvals, curriculum, standards, and cyclical reviews, the academic side of the House leads all of these processes, including program costing and resource allocation decisions as the program continues. So I think the conversations get stuck given that they are siloed into these governance structures and responsibilities. Many of us have heard and or experienced resistance and challenges when central administration or boards are wanting to evaluate program viability or even discuss program efficiencies. Assertions are made that those decisions and discussions are of academic matters and are under the responsibility of Senate, not the board or administration. So recognizing that practices vary from institution to institution, the bicameral nature of higher ed institutions can really inhibit the discussions and the involvement from central finance offices like myself in the academic program financial affairs. So, in tying back to the example Donna highlighted, it isn't it important that a conversation across the university is critical to understand how can this program continue? And more importantly, if it is of high quality and critical for the mission of the academic priorities, then we have to have a conversation about the financial supports and the subventions that are needed to help this program continue.
Thank you so much. And Jovan, I want to build on that a little bit. You know, you're you work with this stuff day in, day out every single day, especially on kind of the quality assurance processes. Who do you think should actually own the conversations about program financials viability? Is it the finance office? Is it a Senate? Is it deans? Is it academic leadership? Whose problem is it?
Problem, yeah. Well, this is certainly a thorny question in it can be in the current landscape. I would say our research suggests, and our conversations with colleagues across the country suggests that there's no single owner, right? It needs to be a shared and structured conversation that involves multiple groups and actors. The challenge is that the existing governance architecture was not designed to facilitate this kind of integrated dialogue, right? And this type of conversation. I'd say in the current state, faculties typically hold the closest knowledge of their program costs and enrollment realities. They often, though, lack the institutional level financial data necessarily, overhead costs, scholarship costs, space charges, other things that are institution specific, that are needed to understand sort of the full program costs. Provosts and deans oversee academic budget allocations and priorities, but their focus is perhaps often on academic planning rather than granular, program level costing. Central finance offices, have the analytical tools and expertise and the institutional data. But as Joanne is saying, and the findings from our focus group confirm, they're rarely involved in these program level financial matters unless, new centrally funded resources are at stake, a new program that has ministry funding. Now, where I sit, quality assurance offices sit at an interesting intersection there. They manage the cyclical program review process, and could really serve as a coordinating function. They typically lack the financial expertise. We don't have it in our office, and really have no mandate to assess, fiscal health. What our work suggests, I would say, is that the conversation really needs to be a collaborative one. And tied to a specific moment, maybe a governance moment. And quality assurance can be that moment, right? The proposed tool that this team, particularly Tina, has worked a lot on from Guelph, who isn't here, a colleague of the team. I think that's the link that you see in the chat. It offers one model of how this could work. A standardized financial template that is completed collaboratively by let's say a host faculty, institutional planning, or a proxy and central finance, and that becomes part of the quality assurance submission package. This way the academic unit itself retains ownership of the program narrative and the quality case itself. And finance provides the costing rigor, and the QA process provides sort of the governance moment when everything is examined together. So Senate committees and board committees can each see the components that are most relevant to their mandate, but the full picture exists in one place and is catalyzed, or could be, by quality assurance.
Ron, I'm going to stick with you for another minute. You just kind of mentioned that there are these kind of governance opportunities that include things like cyclical reviews or in the QA process. But as Donna mentioned earlier in the start, a lot of this costing usually we see when programs are coming up, but not particularly through annual cyclical review. Is that a policy gap or a cultural gap or both? And what would it take to close it?
Wow, the $1 million question. That'll be, the third or the fourth paper that Brendan is yet to speak to. And, I think everybody would agree that it's both, right? And the two, reinforce each other in ways that make the gap pretty persistent, right? The policy gap is very clear from our analysis. Brendan was leading into that. There's no provincial quality assurance agency in Canada that requires financial assessment as part of a cyclical program review. One of them does as part of a new program proposal process. And even in Alberta, in this case, which has the most robust financial requirements, at this proposal stage, there's no corresponding mandate to revisit those financial assumptions at the review stage, which is pretty problematic, So this means that the financial projections that are submitted, as part of a new program proposal are essentially a one-time exercise. No one checks back to see whether the enrollment forecasts are materialized, whether the cost assumptions are held, or whether the cross-subsidization arrangements that might be articulated, that might also be meant to be temporary, become permanent, right? Which may be an issue in and of its own. So the foundational financial story of a program is really just told once and then in effect forgotten by the formal QA process itself, right? Because it's just not meant to follow up. So I would say that's sort of a bit the policy gap. The cultural gap runs, deeper and arguably explains why the other one exists. There's a long-standing norm in Canadian higher education. That's what Joanne was referring to, that treats academic quality and financial performance as separate conversations. Academic units may perceive financial scrutiny as a bit of a threat. I get it. And central finance, may feel unwelcome in discussions that are kind of coded as academic. Senate governance structures can compound this further, as the bicameral system you were referencing and Joanne was speaking to. Financial items may not be easily deliberated on in Senate committees, and parallel academic financial governance tracks don't often intersect. So even in institutions where individual leaders might see the value of integrating financial review, the absence of a cultural norm and the absence of external quality assurance agency requirements means that there's no institutional expectation or accountability mechanism here to make this happen. So to follow up about, well, how do you bring these together? I think that the action is required on a few fronts. The quality assurance agencies across the country, could incorporate financial sustainability assessment more explicitly as a component of cyclical reviews in their frameworks. And as Donna was articulating at the outset, not punitively, right? But as an internal transparency planning exercise owned by the institution, right? And turning to the institutions, I mean, there needs to be standardized tools, or that certainly would help to make the financial component of a review manageable and consistent. And that's what the tools sort of in the chat are trying to do. They're examples of types of tools that could help with that. They provide, that shared template rather than reinventing things and making things comparable across programs. And the last thing I'll say is perhaps most importantly, I would advocate that there needs to be a reframing of the conversation. If I boldly say it, financial transparency is not about cutting programs, but about understanding the true cost of running them and making cross-subsidization, if it's happening, visible and intentional, and essentially ensuring that quality is not silently eroded by resource constraints.
So what I'm hearing is that a whole lot of things that are hard to come together, like bringing in new standards through, let's say, through our provincial agencies and bringing in kind of that cultural standard, all need to occur. That's a tall order all at once. So let's say that happens. Let's say we have the magic wand and we do that. And suddenly we do something like make financial viability an explicit part of every single cyclical review that happens in the country. Donna or Joanne, whoever wants to take it, what's the first thing that would improve? Donna.
I'll go second.
Okay. I hope we have the same answer. So I think the data that we use to make decisions will improve. The decision-making process will improve, and the discussions that we're having and the transparency of those discussions. Jovan mentioned that the subvention has to come from somewhere, and if I could use that, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more and say that, when we look at a cyclical review and we see that there isn't financial viability there are really 4 options. The university says this program is mission critical and provides a subvention to keep it going. The faculty amongst themselves have transparent discussions to say, yes, I'm going to take 50 more students with no additional resources to keep that program going. That's the reality. It's happening already, but we don't have those discussions to that level of transparency. The third opportunity is that the program itself finds a way, is in a position where they have to be able to articulate some way to transform the program into a state that either there's a subvention within the faculty or school, or that it becomes on its own financially sustainable, and cost neutral is the term that we look at. We're not looking at profit here. And the final one is a closure. There are those four options that by having policy, practice, governance, tools, those four elements, requiring us to look at the data and use cost and data as part of quality, it will inspire those conversations and undoubtedly increase the quality of the teaching and the programs that we're offering. I mean, that's bottom line here. We talk about quality, but I think the thing to consider is when there's 4 or 5 students in the major, how much quality is that for those students in terms of that experience, even if there is service teaching? So those are the scenarios I think that those are the kind of things that it would improve immediately. It becomes transparent how those subventions are happening within a unit. The data becomes very transparent to all of it. It becomes a core element of what we would consider collegial governance when we have this level of transparency. I think one point that I'll make, and then I'll throw it over to Joanne, we've also been pulling, if there's a possibility to pull cyclical review documents for programs that have been slated for closure, we've been doing that as well and analyzing those documents. It's very interesting. It might come as a surprise to some people on this call, but often one of the recommendations in a program that is not viable, set for closure, fewer than 5 students enrolling, one of the very common recommendations you see is hiring more faculty. This isn't a productive solution to a program that's already struggling. And I think it just goes to show you that we are not putting policy and governance in place to encourage the kind of discussions that are necessary to see those transformations happen, to improve the quality, and fundamentally to be really thinking responsibly about those sort of academic efficiencies when programs are struggling.
Joanne, over to you.
Well, you'll be happy to know, Donna, I don't have a different answer. But just from a different perspective, I guess what I believe the first thing it would improve is visibility with shared responsibility, as Jovan spoke to. We are all quite aware that academic programs make up the largest component of an institution's expenses, and therefore does have a major impact on the overall financial situation of the university. So from my CFO perspective, in order for me to really effectively manage and help with financial sustainability, it is imperative to have an institution-wide visibility of academic programs. A collaborative effort with shared responsibility, using the quality assurance process as a possible lever or opportunity that would bring central finance, academic units, and quality review um, to enhance visibility and knowledge of academic programs won't inhibit concerns about bicameral governance responsibilities. The goal is not to, as Donna said, the goal is not to make academic programs profitable. But we have to ensure that there is financial visibility to understand where the resources need to come from, as Donna spoke to, as part of the larger university-wide resource allocation priorities that are constantly going on. And I think that this team right here, this group, I've learned so much working with Donna and Jovan and Brandon, and our collective views and perspectives. We can only be better by sharing our thoughts and our perspectives and this shared responsibility. So I'll throw it back to you, Tiffany.
Thank you so much.
Can I add on that, Tiffany, before I go on?
Please.
I just wanted to say, we've been working together as a team with Tina Gobel from Guelph for over a decade now. And I really believe that one of the strengths of the kind of solutions that we've been coming up with and strategies has been the fact that it's been academics and administrators as joint co-PIs on these tri-council grants. It's really unique to bring together those kind of voices to the table to find solutions that could have impact not only on the kind of experiences we have for students, but for faculty and for the university overall. So it's those collaborations Joanne was talking about that's been really the great source of inspiration for the work that we've been doing.
Thank you so much. Brandon, last question to you before we open it up to audience Q&A. And I see the first question in the chat, which is great. So folks, if you have questions, please get them ready. You can put your hand up and ask them loudly or put them into the chat and we'll be sure to answer as many as we can. But Brandon, before we hop into that, looking through our participant list before we hopped on, fortunately, I don't know if we have any government here today, which is a little strange. We usually do. And I think they're missing out if there's no government in here right now. But so I'll remove the government from this question for the second and just focus on institutions. If institutions want to move into this direction, what are the first concrete steps that they should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I really think there's a couple of things. I think there's really three kind of keys to getting started here. And as even though I don't necessarily see government, I do see a couple of names from QA agencies. So I'll speak to them as well, and hopefully they'll take us up on our advice here. The first thing I think is really going back to what Jovan was talking about earlier, and is really about that collaboration and information sharing piece. What we've heard from organizations that have started to use our tool or some variation of it, it's open access for a reason. You can take it, adapt it to your institution as you see fit. And what we've heard from some of these institutions is that the conversations that they're able to have shifted from being adversarial and finance against academic and fighting to really being about understanding and making explicit this is what it costs to actually run this academic program, and going back to some of those solutions and alternatives that Donna and Joanne mentioned. So really it's about that collaboration piece first, and starting to recognize the importance of getting this information not just within one office, not just within Joanne and her equivalent's office, but instead getting it across campus and using it as a way to understand what your options are going forward so that you can actually act on those. And importantly, this, especially at the institutional level, really needs to be an expectation, needs to be a requirement, not just an expectation, not just a norm, not just like a culture thing that you think is happening, but something that's actually built into the process explicitly to make sure that it's happening. The second piece really is not getting lost in the minutia. And I think that's key because oftentimes, a lot of us on this call are academics. We really are striving to have perfect data, or as close to it as we can get. But I think the saying goes that perfect is the enemy of good, right? And what we've seen in running this simulation with this tool is that, well, you're not necessarily, even if you're not getting a complete picture, even if you don't think you like this variable, somebody's arguing that, oh, we've got this variable missing and we need to add this thing in, whatever the case happens to be, you can run it with fewer variables, you can run it with more variables, but the end result, the numbers might be a little bit different, but the end result ultimately is going to be the same. You're going to see if the program is going to turn a profit, not that that's the goal, but or if it needs a subvention, whatever the case happens to be. If it can be self-sustaining, you're going to see that regardless. And so not getting lost in the minutiae, I really think, is a key to actually implementing this and picking something, standardizing it, and going forward from there. And the third, I think, really is recognizing a need for change. And I think that's why people are on this call and are kind of interested in this conversation. But what we heard from people in all offices at the institutional level, at the QA agency level, across the country, is sometimes they feel that the roles feel different. We have this bicameral system at our institutions. We have this bicameral system in our governments where we see that, we're just looking at quality. That's what we're focused on. If the program's of good quality, we've done our job, and that's kind of separate. But what we're seeing is that the way that things are going just isn't working, and saying, well, that's kind of outside of our mandate and we're not going to talk about that is not necessarily going to be beneficial going forward and isn't going to provide us the data that we need. For those of you who are at University, a couple of weeks ago, Donna alluded to the song by Bon Jovi, "Living on a Prayer," and that's really what our kind of quality assurance process has been riding on, is this idea that just take my hand, we'll make it, I swear. And I think that that's such a good way to look at the way that things have been, and recognizing that there is a need for change. There is a need for things to shift if we're going to see this. And so the first concrete steps really are sharing that information, not getting lost in the minutia, and recognizing that there is actually a step that needs to be taken, and then actually taking that step.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And folks, at this point, we're going to open up to questions to you. So however you want to ask your question, feel free. There are questions that some people submitted on their way into the session today. And I will first ask Vanessa's question to this group and then start pulling questions from that. So Vanessa had asked, if governments were to include financial sustainability in their evaluation metrics, how do you see a program that requires subvention actually getting approval to continue? Donna, I see you on mute.
I think that's me, yes. So a couple of things here. It's important to note that across Canada, it's done very differently. It's already done this way for new programs, for example, in Alberta. There are some jurisdictions where major institutions, for example, in Saskatchewan, do not have to go to government at all. As long as they can make it work within their financial envelope, they don't have that external step of quality assurance. So it looks quite different. But that is, in my earlier comment, I said there's 4 scenarios. There are 4 scenarios here. You could institutional subvention, departmental subvention, changes within the program, or sunsetting a program. The reality is that there is a 5th option, especially on cyclical reviews. You could have a situation where government is saying, institutions, you have all the autonomy that you want. You have all the autonomy that you want. You offer whatever you want to do. We're just not funding that right now. And then that automatically forces the institution to look at those 4 other options. Do we find a way to reinvent to trigger that government funding again? Do we find a way to do the internal subvention because we really think that program with 3 students is critical to our mission? What do we do here? I want to add to that if you haven't watched the webinar from last week, it's really important to watch that, because that Queen's talked about what they did in the arts and science faculty facing massive deficits, like in the tens, like $30 or $40 million in deficits, where it was one of those puncture points in that equilibrium research that we talk about, or theory that we look at. We don't have the opportunity to get to that point. We don't want to get to that point, but that's in fact, in at a large view, what was happening internally. They were looking at ways to actually deal with the same issues we're talking about here. So there's no question government at any point could come in and say that to us. They already are. In Ontario, if you propose a new program, it will sit on government's desk for 1, 2, 3 years. And it's quite different between the college sector and the university sector in Ontario. The college sector is already looking at financial viability and sustainability. It's already part of their discourse in terms of how programs are approved and maintained. I think we can anticipate, particularly as financial challenges increase, particularly given the messages that we heard in BC recently, the things happening in Newfoundland, in the Maritimes in general, that government could come back and say something to us, even without putting the governance in place to deal with it internally before it gets to that stage.
Thank you so much. Giselle has a great question, but I'm going to say there might be questions that are better aligned for this group, but Giselle, email me after this because I have lots of thoughts and comments on that actually. Karen Brebner from my alma mater asked a lovely question on what did you find when doing this work about how many collective agreements are set up in a way that means that closing a program would result in removing faculty so that there could be savings. At small institutions, there's a lot of teaching and most teaching is done by tenured faculty. I can tell you that I don't think I took a class that wasn't from a tenured faculty member, as a matter of fact, but that's still a lot of their budget. So what does that look like in collective agreements across the country?
That's me again. So it's a really good question, right? It's the question that comes up. That's the question of academic efficiencies. That's the question of program closures. What happens to the faculty, and does the collective agreement allow for it? I would say that the collective agreements across the country vary very significantly on exigency clauses for when programs are sunset or how programs can be sunset. But what I would say in response to, before we get to the issue of looking at what the collective agreement is saying, having that mechanism to have those conversations about where the subvention can happen, having the real data to look at and to have as part of ongoing collegial discussions within a program, I think will go a long way to addressing those kind of clauses or concerns within collective agreements if we get to that. It could be like, for example, in the Queen's model, even though the Queen's example, if you go back to that video, they talked about, I think, 18% reduction in academic cost overall when they did their program restructuring or the modular restructuring. It's going to have some implications, but I believe two things that we've been doing continually. We've been talking about the bicameral system as something to stop us from thinking about this. And we've been talking about collective agreements to stop us from thinking about this. And I think we have to get past that point.
Brad has a fantastic question that also came up in the pre-submitted questions. Do you folks have any thoughts on how different institutional budgeting models, enrollment-based, activity-based, responsibility-centered, makes program costing easier or harder? That is a super interesting question to me too. And folks, if you have absolutely no idea about what types of budgeting models are, I'm going to put a link in the chat of a very short book on what university budgets look like and how different institutions manage their budgets overall. And I highly recommend. It's a great intro for anybody. So that is just a random plug for this 100-page book that I thoroughly enjoy. Who would like to take on budget models and program costing?
Well, I'll start.
Thanks, Joanne.
Yeah, so I think that it can help. It should be helping. Because then there is attention to programs enrollment. But what I find is that it addresses the shifts of new enrollment. So as new enrollments come in, enhanced enrollments come in, then dollars from tuition or grants might or resources may be reallocated to support that. But how do you deal with the legacy programs? And is enrollment, my question would be, are these enrollment or activity-based budget models really addressing the decrease of enrollment and shifting that? So I guess it depends on how the budget models are really getting down to the program level. But I certainly think it would help. And the only other thing I would add is that where are the conversations still happening? Are all these budget model discussions happening in the academic units? Are we really having that opportunity for that shared responsibility? So back to a big discussion that we've been having on this call is that shared responsibility awareness. So I think added to that is still the shared responsibility and discussions. Donna?
Yeah, so of course, budget models differ across the country, and one of the key examples is when it gets to how service teaching is compensated. And Brandon made the point that the two tools that we have, one that sort of costs a program specifically, and one that will allow you to nest programs within a faculty, regardless of which variables you use, the simulations have been tested to show the same result. The budget models can vary quite significantly. Where this, I think, is really particularly supportive, just to reiterate that again, is in the kind of conversations that when you have the costing that are inspired amongst colleagues or within the program or faculty level. And those are the kind of discussions that actually inspire change. Tina talks about this, our colleague from Guelph. Tina talks about this quite extensively because of her work with the one tool specifically, the Academic Advantage Analyzer. And what she's shared in other presentations is that it allows the budget to be made more transparent. It allows those conversations to happen in ways that haven't happened in the past. We have the cyclical review. We know straight across the country that very rarely do we go back and check assumptions. We may have said at one point that we were going to bring 20 or 30 students in. Here we are 6, 7, 8 years later, we're bringing in 3 or 4 and we're asking for more faculty. And there isn't a point to go back and check. The conversations change regardless of the budget model that's implemented at the institution.
I'm going to give the next question over to Dan Lang, who has his hand up. So Dan, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, I wasn't going to ask that question. I was going to comment on the previous question.
Well, please comment on the previous question.
So the first is that I think activity-based costing is probably 35 years old. It's not a new idea. And responsibility center budgeting is about 30 years old. It started in the United States and then came into Canada. So that's not a new idea. I think given what we've just been talking about, is how decentralized is it? So for example, at the University of Toronto at McMaster, program means the degree. I mean, it really pushes it far, far down. In other cases, it pushes it down to a unit in the organization, in which case within that unit, you can pool it. Okay, we have some that are recovering all their costs. There's some that are not. Some are recovering more than their costs. But as long as the unit balances, we consider that to be satisfactory. So when you think through something like that, the question is, how does it affect your organization chart? That is to say, where does it end? I think although I've heard this thing about 80%, I'd be surprised if 80% of a university's costs are all tied up in academic programs. I think it might be 60, 65%. The point I'm getting at is your very large number has absolutely nothing to do with it. But it's a different the budget process. And the idea is that you charge the academic units for whatever services you get from that other part of the budget, which is an entirely different budget. So I think in some respects, getting to the bottom of it is, well, I think we've got the academic side figured out. How are we going to figure out the administrative side? And third thing I wanted to comment on, and this is unique to Canada, which is why I have to be careful when we look at models elsewhere, and that is we don't have a database that separates the costs of research from instruction. You can separate the indirect costs of research. You cannot, when I say you cannot, you could, but we don't. I guess is probably the better way that I wanted to say it. So then this begs a question: the quality of what? Is it the quality of instruction, the program, or is it quality of the research? And as long as we put them together, I think, and I can imagine arguments for and against, but I can't imagine we're going to get much farther than where we are now. And the last point I wanted to make is, and I typed this in a while ago, and that is, have the group of you looked at what's called the resources section of evaluation criteria in the Ontario Quality Assurance Framework? Because it seems to me that asks the resource question. Now, maybe we're doing a poor job or a better job answering it, but the point is it does ask the question. And further, it says that the question can only be answered by the president, the provost, or the chairman of well, in our case, the chairman of the governing council, as you do not let deans answer that question. Because in the previous model, again in Ontario, you could have an external review that said, within 2 years, this program is going to be insolvent unless you hire 3 more or whatever, that sort of thing. And it was acceptable that the dean could say, well, I will ask for that. What changed was, well, the dean can ask for that, but that doesn't count until the provost or the president says, and we will put it in the budget. So that's really pretty much what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Dan. Going to move us forward, unless anyone wants to answer that quickly, please just flag me. We have 5 minutes left, so I'll ask one more question and then close us out. Glenn Craney asked a good question that is in a different realm of the questions that we've been asking. Has your study looked at what happens when a program creates a surplus? Surpluses, crazy things, they actually do occur. Positive, wild things, they do exist sometimes. What's that look like from the point of your research?
So practically speaking, programs that generate a surplus are often providing a subvention to a program that isn't breaking even. It's not transparent, though. It's not transparent. those discussions are very challenging to have in the absence of governance policy tools. Surpluses across, I think it's really actually kind of rare to look at an entire faculty or entire school and find a context where every program is generating a surplus, because for the most part, we know that there's going to be that need for subventions. There's going to be core programs that are part of our identity, mission critical, that we know we're going to need to provide a subvention for. The question is, how transparent is that to the individuals that are asking, for example, for that niche program, or with 5 students and asking for increased faculty members, or how transparent is it within the overall budget model of the faculty or the institution? These are the things that I think have been obscured a little bit by the processes that we've been seeing across the country. And I will say, overwhelmingly across Canada on both levels of our national study, we definitely heard from people saying a few common themes. We know we need to program cost, we're just not sure how. We know we need to think about building this into governance, we're just not sure how. We know that this is a key issue in terms of us finding a sustainable future for the institution. We're just not sure how. And so I think that that's been the common theme that we've heard across the country.
Any last words before I close this out? Donna?
I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here and for taking interest in this work. These are really critical discussions. I was reflecting on Dan's point that he made, and I just want to say, from one of our participants in our national study said that the challenge here is government thinks that they are buying teaching. The public thinks they're buying teaching, and the universities think that they're selling research. And there's that tension that happens when you're thinking of how do you cost something. And I think the days of Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer are over.
Folks, thank you all so much for joining. Thanks everyone who's joined us today as a guest on Focus Friday. You can find the Focus Friday recordings on YouTube. I put a link up earlier, but if you go to YouTube and type in Higher Education Strategy Associates, you will find us there, and we post these just a little bit after each recording. Not next week, on March 13th, it's actually 3 full weeks, which seems like a big old gap. We're going to be joined by the University of Alberta, who is going to be walking us through how they cross-functionally use AI within their institution. So we have members from the Teaching and Learning Center, IT, the Research Office, graduate programs, and the library coming in to talk about how they use AI together to build kind of efficiency across the institution. If you have any other comments or any other topics you'd like to see covered in Focus Friday, please reach out to me at tmaclennan@higheredstrategy.com. You can find my email pretty well anywhere. And again, thanks so much for joining. Canada did win 3-2 if anyone was paying too much attention. So good things have happened on top of program costing. Brandon can be hired. There's lots of great things going on. Folks, thank you all for joining, and I hope you have a great afternoon.